Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Forest Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Eco Play, conversation on AI, gamification, and sustainability. And to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, live from Forest Space. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Forest Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-create daily activities, and examine research questions, projects, games, things in development across the university. We're running today's event also as a live stream Zoom meeting. Those of you joining us there via Zoom, if you have any comments or questions, just pop those into the chat. We can try and read those out during the Q&A. Those of you here in the space, same story. If you have a question, comment, just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over to you. Okay. Now, very much my pleasure pass things over to a public scholar and doctoral candidate in the Department of Design and Computation Arts, Burcu Olgen. Burcu, welcome in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to EcoPlay. Thank you for being here today, whether you're joining us here at Force Space or tuning in online. This event is all about exploring how games and digital technologies and AI can help us better understand and care for our environment. So we will start a roundtable chat and try out how two games today, one digital and one board game. But first, I'm lucky to be joined by amazing guests here, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Just a few words about who you are and what you're working on these days. So I'll start with Dr. Anne-Louise here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Burcu. So I'm Anne-Louise Davidson. I'm a professor in the Department of Education. I'm also the new director of the microprogram on innovation mindset. I've been directing the Innovation Lab since 2020, trying to help students to build their confidence in innovation. And what I'm working on recently is I'm trying to participate in saving the world through regenerative agriculture practices. That's my newest thing beyond sustainability. How can we make things better for the generations to come?
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me as a guest here. I'm Negar Rahimi. I'm a PhD student in Indie program. My research is about facade and how facade can impact on the sustainability of the built environment and also provide a better and healthier space for residents.
Hi, my name is Faisal. I am a PhD candidate in the individualized program. I research use of AI and other data-driven technologies for circular economy, where you and I interact with things like waste and materials. I also am a longtime practitioner of environmental projects here at Concordia, so I'm always thinking about how to get people to be more sustainable.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me here. So I'm Babak, I'm also a PhD candidate, and my focus is more like regarding transport, sustainable transport, and like how to promote active mobility, public transport, and like these kind of practices. But at the same time, also I'm a researcher in regarding gamification that we will go for it later on, I guess, when we have the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. So before we jump into the conversation, I just want to quickly go over a few terms that we might hear in the conversation throughout the talk. So if you have any comments, like feel free to jump in with these. Oh my, I forgot Scott. I'm so sorry. So excited. Hi, Scott.
Hi. Yeah, super quick. I'm sorry that I can't be there. I'm currently in Seattle doing a research grant looking at disinformation in games, which is what my PhD studies as a fifth-year PhD candidate at Concordia. I look at the relationship between kind of information literacy and games as tools to kind of inform the public about them, which in relationship to sustainability looks at like AI ethics, information literacy, resiliency within communities, both online and offline. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Sorry about that. I forgot the most important guest of the hour. So I'm gonna go over a few terminologies. first one is eco-didactic. So when we say eco-didactic, we talk about the ways of teaching environmental ideas through creative methods like art installations, storytelling, or hands-on experiences. So the goal is to spark awareness about sustainability by engaging people emotionally and intellectually in public or shared spaces. So this term is coined by my thesis co-supervisor, Dr. Carmela Cucuzzella, and her partners in the grant that they were doing. So the second one is serious game, which we are gonna demonstrate in the second half. So a serious game is basically a game that's built to do more than just entertain. It might be used for education, training, or raising awareness about real-world issues like climate change or urban planning. So in our context, the games, serious games help players can learn about sustainability and in a simulated environment, allow them to do decision-making and so on. So maybe we can talk about like why these called serious games later on, like because they're not serious, they're fun as well. So there's another terminology about game, which is gamification, which means adding game-like elements, like points, challenges, rewards into something that isn't usually a game. So it's used a lot in education and marketing to make things more engaging. And the last one is game-based learning, which is more like a theory that when the game itself is an actual learning tool. So instead of just adding game mechanics to existing content like gamification, in these theories you learn by playing the game. So let's jump into our conversation. So feel free to speak casually and openly. So I will have guest-specific questions, but also if you have anything to add on those questions as well, you can. So I divided this conversation in 4 sections. The first one will talk about games and learning and awareness, and the second part will be about AI, digital technologies, and their roles in games. And the third part will be about public engagement and policy making. And finally, we will talk about the future expectations, innovations, and exciting things. First part, about gamification and game-based learning for environmental awareness. So gamification helps break down complex environmental issues by turning them into fun, interactive experiences. So instead of just throwing facts at people, it uses things like storytelling, rewards, and challenges to get them involved. So it makes learning about sustainability more hands-on, engaging, and easier to connect with while encouraging real-world action. So here's the context of the first part. So I'm going to start with a question for Dr. Anne Louise. So drawing from your work on gamification and game-based learning, how does these approaches differ from traditional methods in teaching environmental concepts? So how can these strategies create more environmental awareness in more effective way? You work on regenerative agriculture, and we work together with designing games for that. Could you give us insights from
Yeah, so in principle, sorry, in principle, when you teach something about sustainability or regeneration, there's a tendency for people who are instructors or professors or teachers to to focus on declarative knowledge. So that's telling people something is, right? So here are the 6 principles of regenerative agriculture, or here is a framework to study sustainability. And then people talk about things on a theoretical perspective without ever really understanding what happens when you dive into a practice. And the tension between theory and the experience of the body in the world is something that have been discussed since the pre-Socratics. So it's nothing new, but this is a tension that I like to work in. When we talk about games or games in education or gamification, everybody knows that playing a game is fun. So educators start to do games that sometimes are the most boring games ever. And then you kind of wonder, like, what game did I play or what did I learn? The real advantage is when we start to think about the design of the game. So there's something to learn when you design a game, because you can design a game, and I refer now to a game that's called Oink something, Oink Oink, that Scott designed for the Innovation Lab last year, where Scott is an expert in game design, but not in regenerative agriculture. So his tentative of prototypes needed to be tested with experts, subject matter experts, who could actually tell him, for example, you forgot about tools, or you forgot about this, or you forgot about that. So in theory, you can learn something. In practice, there's another set of learning, which is the local knowledge structures. Then the other aspect of it is the facilitation. So you can develop a lot of skills as an instructor or as an educator to learn to facilitate games, which is another set of skills. And then there's all the potential around the playing, which is if I play through something which is beyond just the declarative knowledge, and I'm starting to learn, for example, the mechanisms or the methods or the processes or the constraints, and the game is well designed, then there are chances that your cognitive framework or the template with which you're looking at a concept might be a little bit more thorough and a little bit more developed. So you have more characteristics to start to categorize elements of declarative knowledge that you might be encountering. And what that means is, the 6 principles or the definitions and so on and so forth are now more categorized in a framework that's a bit more complex. So
Yeah,
that's it.
thank you. Thanks so much. I have the second question to Scott. I was wishing to see you there, but sorry. First, you designed a game about disinformation. Could you briefly talk about your game? What message is it giving? Why did you choose this medium to talk about disinformation?
For sure. So the game most popular or common that I've made about disinformation is called Lizards and Lies, which was designed in 2021 and 2022. It's a game about how conspiracy theory moves through social media. And it came out initially through a research question of, can we model digital environments through physical games? And so we made a board game that was able to show information flows, information pipelines in a relatively complex way, because those structures are complex, but in a means that was comprehensible to individuals like undergrads that could play it. Currently, I'm also designing some other disinformation games for different age groups, such as those for middle school students, like a narrative storytelling game, as well as kind of a card game for high school students. And in each of those cases, kind of hearkening back to what Anne-Louise was just talking about, there's a conversation about what are the learning goals that we're trying to get for that audience and that demographic, and how are we altering kind of the concepts of like disinformation, which is large and ambiguous and nuanced, down to kind of the meaningful bits that those groups need to understand in relationship to what we want to talk about.
That's great. So you also answered my other question that I didn't even ask. Perfect. Thank you so much. I have this question here in general, like also if you want to talk about this, like how can we balance entertainment and education in environmental games without undervaluing the issues? Anyone? Yeah.
I mean, first, maybe I can explain the game that we are developing. Like our game called City Player, which allows the user to put themselves as a role of a city planner or urban designer and be able to make changes in the urban environment. It could be different things, buildings, like the trees, the public spaces, transport related issues. So like what we are trying to do in our game to like we are creating this experiential learning environment so that the user learn things by doing some modification and go through those experiences in the streets, because in the game you can actually walk through the environment freely and see how the changes affect your life, the quality of your life. So this is the thing that when we talk about balancing about like educate like fun, like having entertaining games and like learning experience, is like we try to embed learning in decision making, like rather than like we just present the information to the user, we try to help user to make decision and see the consequences of their actions and the decisions. Like for example, in our case, in the city layer, if the user decides to prioritize parking, like bike parking over like like some car facilities, you can see how that change like the quality of life and the accessibility issue and so on and so on. Yeah, this is what we do at least in our games.
Anyone else? Scott, do you have anything to say for that?
Yeah, do you mind just repeating the question so I can answer it directly?
I'm asking, like, how do you create balance between entertainment and education in a
Yeah,
game?
and it is a balance that you want to strike. I actually refer to it more of like a tension, where, especially in the space of education, you're trying to balance kind of this fun and engaging, I think, for your students alongside the learning goals, which sometimes aren't always fun and engaging, such as when I made like an escape room on elder abuse, and that's not like a fun topic, right? And sometimes because commercial games are so focused on fun, we feel like educational games need to be focused on fun. And because of that, you have what Anne Louise was referring to when she opened around like these educators that just make a game where it's kind of boring actually at the end of the day because it's just kind of a nothing set of questions. So the term that I like to use more often when I think about that tension is engagement or interaction, where it's thinking about what are the players doing and how is what they're doing directly tied to the learning goals or the objectives of the system and structure that I'm teaching. Where fun for me is so subjective, like what I find fun versus what you find fun is going to be different, especially if you're designing for kids and young audiences. Some kids, their version of fun is flipping the table. And so you have to think about what is the actual actions you want players to engage with and design that way, and make sure that those actions are not just clicking a button or not just clicking next and reading a story, but making sure that they have an agency or a say in what's going on, because agency and is a form of interaction in games that is pivotal for players to leave that experience and go, that was fun, even if the learning material itself is quite serious or intense or even scary in some cases.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
I can add something about this if you want, and it's maybe an extreme experience, but if you think about Guitar Hero, for example, which is a video game, not the same kind of game at all, but I have been speaking with many kids who tell me, yeah, I play the guitar. So I put a guitar in their hands and there's no way they understand how to play guitar. They don't even know notes, but they know how to press buttons that are the cognitive hook that goes with getting points on a screen. But this doesn't relate to anything real. So that's the tension that Scott's referring to. To what extent can I use the game as a simulation to what they really need to learn in principle?
Yeah, great points. Okay, so let's transform into the next subject a little bit. So I'm going to ask you if you experienced any challenges in designing these type of games, or like, or even like playing one. Like, did you find anything challenging and encountered any issues you think needs to be addressed? Anyone?
So I mean, yeah, we face several challenges. Like we already just mentioned this like target audience. So like that's very challenging for us. Like because one of our play session, when we reach out to people, to certain like groups with certain demographic backgrounds, when we refer to like, okay, we want to make certain changes in this neighborhood, we want to make it better, but it's for a video game. This term video game, like they say, okay, no, I don't do video games. That's not something that I can do. So that what we learned, that we need to be more flexible regarding the terminology. Like it's very important which target audience you're aiming for, and like based on that, like you just maybe be very flexible regarding that. Then like some other challenges, like yeah, just taking a look at my notes. Yeah, like another challenge we faced was like this, like again, our game is about improving your neighborhood. So if you want to like, if you want to let the user to make any improvement that they want, of course they are going to max up the improvements in the neighborhood. Like let's give an example. If you want to tell a user, okay, this is a bus station, what would you add to that bus station to make it comfortable for you? You can add a heater, you can add AC, you can create a clothes shelter, bus station. Of course, they would go for all of them. So in this way, we could not figure it out. What is the priority of the neighborhood or the residents? Like we need to, because in the end, the outcome is like, okay, we can present some priorities, and this is the most important thing for the user of this certain neighborhood. So what we did, we defined this like currency token. Like that was one idea. Like was just an idea that, okay, we give a limited amount of currency to the users and let them decide like which one comes first for them, and then like based on that we could get a decent outcome, I would say. Yeah, these are some of the challenges. Yeah.
I have sort of a question, I guess, to pose to people, and maybe a bit of my experience bundled in there. Like this idea, because I'm not an expert in games, I haven't even designed any games, but I'm thinking about it a lot for sure. One of my projects is to design an interactive smart waste bin. And, there's an AI component in there that would help recognize what you're throwing away and help you sort it. And there's the possibility that we would sort of gamify that or create incentive structures right around that at the point of disposal. So there's like an interesting thing we could be doing where at the moment where you're actually doing the action, there's a game. And so maybe it would reinforce at the right time the behavior we want. And so what I'm getting at here is that, these games that we're talking about mostly are separate from like the experience, right? And that thing is actually bundled into the experience sort of. And so there's this underlying question of, does the game that you're playing, this abstraction somewhere else, translate to the desired behaviors or actions in the real world? And how do you determine that? Like, are there people who are testing the efficacy of games in translating into real world actions, right? Like I played a great game the other day for the first time. It's been sitting in my board game deck for 3 years unplayed. But maybe that's part of like environmental games. They're not that alluring or initially, but eventually you're like, we should play this game. It's called Solutions. Have you heard of it? It's a climate change like prioritization game, right?
I have it now.
You have it. Okay. So we'll play it one day.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to get you to understand the set of solutions and really think about why they're effective or not. And then you try to sort them, and then they give you the answer after, right? So, okay, that's great. We could all kind of get educated on that. And then does that stick? Does that translate into real world advocacy? Those are some questions I would have about solutions, and I wish somebody would research that. So maybe somebody has the answer here.
Yeah. So I probably Dr. and Luis had the best answer, but for me, from my experience, I researched on this. So I designed the game, and I was thinking, how am I gonna, like, I want to create these conversations in the public realm, and how am I gonna evaluate this? And I looked into it. Of course, education is not my field, but it needs like constant testing throughout time. So we need to wait and like test it again, like maybe a year later, or like give it a time. And if they still remember or change their behavior throughout that year or that period of time, the basic knowledge I have is this. And it was beyond my PhD term. So but I included all this like in my thesis, but as a limitation actually, because I cannot test the game if it's actually changing any behavior or not. Yeah.
I almost want to invite Scott to talk about game elements and mechanics, because that's something that you both referred to. And I think that having sort of like a summary or a statement by Scott might be cool.
Yeah, I can start by talking about what game elements and mechanics are, and then I can kind of address the question that was just posed to the room. So when we talk about game elements and game mechanics, mechanics are generally the things that a player does. So like in Monopoly, you're going to roll dice. That's a mechanic. You're going to then move around the board. The elements are like the pieces, right? The thimble that you choose, which is the best piece in Monopoly. The mechanics might be when you land on a tile, you have to draw a certain type of card, and then that card tells you another effect. It's the things that you're doing and the actions you're taking. Monopoly is very simple. It's very procedural in the sense that you don't have a ton of say over what's happening, right? It's randomized to the dice. Whereas something like a video game, you can do multiple different inputs to make your character do all these different actions and activities, and your sky is the limits in what you're doing. When it comes to testing the efficacy of a game or the learning goals of a game, that's a question that actually extends beyond games itself, right? You're kind of asking a question of how do we determine that a medium or media is something that is teaching us something? How do we ever infer that, right? Because then you're asking questions of how does knowledge get translated to an audience? And well, education has, assessments of pedagogy, and a lot of early game studies work will do like a pre-test of the game to see what they know, and then a post-test of the game to see what they know. Other studies more recently have talked about how like those kind of testings are ephemeral, where we'll have a lot of knowledge post the play experience because we just did the thing and it's on our minds, but maybe a month later that seems to be gone. Or not necessarily gone, but not as rigid or structured as it was when we finished the game. And for me as a designer, I recognize that no single experience is going to be the thing that changes someone's perspective of the world. Rarely do we have moments in our lives, other than maybe a near-death experience or something like that, that directly changes our actions and behaviors. Rather, it's short nudges and slight adjustments over time that kind of encourage us to challenge our worldviews or enforce new ones. And games, what they do is they provide, through those mechanics, those actions that we're taking, space for us to interact with environments so that hopefully when we come along those environments in our real life, we can be like, oh yeah, there was a game about that. So like to Anne Louise's point of like Guitar Hero, you don't learn to play guitar through Guitar Hero, but maybe you know when you pick up a guitar for the first time to learn it, kind of where your hands need to go. Kind of what like strumming may or may not look like. Though it's not perfect and it's not a direct example, it's providing that space and knowledge. And so to test that, what we really need is long form studies, right? We need studies that look at the game and then look at how that game is translated into moments of their lives. So one of the things that I'm doing to do that right now is I'm having high school students journal their media diets alongside the game that they're playing. So they're going to play the game at the start of the term. Then for the next month and a half, they're going to just journal their media, and they're going to play the game at the end of the term again. And we're going to see if at any point that journaling references back to the game. We're not asking them to do that, but we're seeing if that game can be a grounding experience for that. The other piece to test efficacy is to look at how those mechanics are designed, to look how those kind of pieces of the game are designed, and assess how they match up with learning goals, and see how teachers themselves see that value. If the educator who's going to use your game or the instructor who's going to use your game can look at the pieces that are in the game and be like, I can teach this concept because I can see it in the game, then at least the game is fitting within generalized curriculum goals. So there's some relevance to efficacy there. But your question is a good one, because how do we ever know that something is something that has changed or altered our opinion or perspective on the world? And that takes a long form of assessment on kind of how knowledge is integrated with our actions, which is, we could probably talk about for days, if not years.
Thank you.
Maybe I can add something from the perspective of an educator who's been in the business of education for, I guess, a quarter century and over. There is never any assurance that what you learn or what you teach in theory, even through games, will be transferred in practice, and in the long run either, right? So there's the transfer of learning, which is still very difficult. Like I'm thinking about, for example, teacher education. You can indoctrinate teacher as much as you want to socio-constructivist practices. And when they get to the field and their teacher associate says, forget what you learned in university, I'm going to teach you what happened on the field, then you start to learn what the teacher associate wants to teach you. And then you completely forget what happened. So there's never any study that will actually show direct impact. But I think that a pedagogy that aims to go more from authentic experience, from the bottom up, right, from grassroots, so that we can actually theorize about it and start understanding that we might have some biases in how we teach theory about certain things that we assumed for many years were the right way. So that's where is the potential of the gamification comes in, where you can start looking at what is classically misunderstood about a concept that we can gamify around so that the learners can start developing a mindset around that. So,
yeah, thank you. I just want to like jump into the other section since we are talking about this. I like it. So so about public engagement and policy implications. So not just like teaching, like making people learn something, but also maybe these games, like what I'm at least hoping to create dialogues in the public realm and ultimately achieving some like changes in policy. So how we can do that at least? Like, can we create dialogues? And if it goes like, of course, like the people, the citizens will be the ones that who's gonna want that somehow, and the policy will change. So what are your thoughts on around this?
I mean, first of all, I just want to address the the basic challenge there for me is like the idea of taking like a, I don't know, something you're working on formally and then having it translate to like policy or advocacy. There's like a current political environment that might not be very like friendly towards people who are doing that. So you would have to try to like depoliticize it as much as possible, right? And like have it be like neutrally about, you know, participation or advocacy, right? And that's, I think, the basic challenge, right? Like this kind of like, how do you take away this automatic assumption of like when you're doing environmental advocacy, it's a sort of like a side of a debate kind of thing that you're advocating for or trying to get people to push forward. And I don't know the answer to this question, but I just wanted to address that. Like any conversation I have with any, you know, supervisor or colleague about like, let's get people involved in doing stuff. It's like, oh, maybe that's scary. Maybe we shouldn't do that. We don't want to get in trouble. So what do we do about that?
Yeah.
So actually, there is a fact that if we want somebody to learn something, there should be with a joy. So that's maybe the main concept of gamification or serious games. So they enjoy the time and then they learn better. So it leads us to the idea to make eco installation in public spaces. And then we can have like such games and teach sustainability through the eco installation. So there would be some public who are interested to have more engagement and like play the actual game, so they would learn more. Or if not, if even they pass by, they can learn something, they can see the engagement, they can see the dynamic, and even that dynamic leads to the sustainability, you know. So there are tons of ways to use the public space. Like one of the ways that we talked about was to use the facade as a canvas to, because facade is the most important part of the building that people interface the urban environment. So we can use it as an installation and like have like, for example, using media facade or parametric facade to, you know, interact with people. So to make this engagement and then people can involve. Like I remember the first time that we had a test for the first version of this game with random people, like there were a mix of academic and non-academic players, and even for the academic players, some you know, some words was really hard to understand sustainability. So however, it was game, they were like a little bit stressed, so it was not easy for them to understand. And then we learned that you know, the role of engagement is so important. So if we just like the first version, we just focus on the teaching of sustainability, like to find solution for the problem, and then all of the players were stressed, like I don't know how to answer it, I haven't heard about this type of sustainability, I don't know about the CGs. But then we made it some more fun, and then they learn it like indirectly. So I guess the most important thing is to have engagement with people, interaction with people, and then when they enjoy, they learn definitely better.
Sure.
Like when it comes to like getting some useful insights from the users, like when we look at in the most of the traditional methods when it comes to public consultations, they're very passive, like majority of them, not of all of them, but they're very passive. But what gamification provides is this active engaging in a fun way to bring the user to see what they want from the like certain like element of the, for example, again, in our case, urban environment. So one thing that we were trying to do, like one of our hypotheses in our research is that we are going to increase the quality of feedback in comparison with the like other traditional way. And this is going to be achieved by, like, for example, what we were aiming to, like the target audience, we were looking to bring the people who use a transit hub on a daily routine basis. So these people already are familiar with the problems, with the issues that that transit hub already has, and they can provide the realistic feedback to us. But again, it comes to this challenge, like how are we going to take these insights and transfer them to action policies? This is a very challenging part that we need to think about. And personally, I don't have the answer for that, but like would be nice if can someone give some of the insight to it.
Scott, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here because the conversation is really generative and everyone's raising some really good, interesting pieces here. So the policy and game space is actually an emerging space that isn't talked about a ton. So there actually are groups in Canada and various governments worldwide that use game-based approaches to help design policy, specifically in the space of futures-based work. So that's people trying to think of like, what does a policy look like 5, 10 years down the road, where they use these kind of simulation style games as an approach to get audiences to understand kind of the issue, the multifaceted nature of it, and then try to direct solutions in that regard. Does it work? It's more engaging, as people are mentioning on the table, than sitting around and just being like, what's a policy answer? And we have to remember that, like, when we talk about issues of like climate change and climate sustainability in Canada, it is not, there's no single solution. There are various industries, various actors, and people's lives are all kind of intertwined in dealing with climate, thinking about kind of our, between our oil industry to just the general mass size of Canada for transportation, right? Like there are so many questions that we have to bring to the table that games, especially very like systemic games that have a lot of pieces and moving parts and actors, can be really good at helping people understand. There's some great literature that even looks at like during the Cold War, people were playing games to help the public kind of understand the geopolitics that was behind what was going on. And those kind of games were really involved in getting advocacy by having people just understand how complex these issues are. In my world of disinformation studies and linking it to kind of the conversation here on climate, we see that there's a lot of denialism that still exists, or at least dismay in some capacity or some form of like, it's not going to matter for me right now. And the literature talks heavily about part of the challenge is because climate change has become this like large term where like we know that like ice caps are melting and oceans are going to rise and like you're going to see larger challenges come from that. But for many people, like a rural farmer in the middle of the US, that reality doesn't mesh with their kind of current life, even if we can point to examples from time to time. And so some of the solutions that seem to work best are solutions that directly relate what's going on to their existence and or their family or the next generation of their family. And that's where games can also be really good because games can paint scenarios. They can paint possibilities that we can insert our voice, our narrative, ourself into. And so when we want to kind of increase advocacy, and some of the literature on the disinfo stuff talks about having those farmers in the middle of the US realize how these impacts of like climate change are going to directly impact their children who they want to have work on their farm per se. And so games can do stuff like that by engaging people in conversation around things that are large, arguably really scary and anxiety inducing in a way that is hopefully less intensive than sitting through a public talk and then trying to raise your voice and give suggestions that may or may not be heard and taken.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I had just a riff off of what you were saying, Scott, about like the farmers and sort of their perspective and bringing in, the impacts of climate change into a game so that they might more directly, viscerally kind of be concerned about. And I guess what I think about is like people who are, let's say, climate change deniers or whatever, who swim in this different world of information about what climate change may mean or whether it's real or not and what the real risk is relating to it. It's like they exist in a totally different game, right? Like, so if you present them a game with sort of like these facts about the potential impacts of climate change, they might not even just look at it, right? They're already playing a different game. So I wonder if there's like, a game design element that's like about recognizing the two different games or worlds that people, live in and trying to sort of bridge them in a way, right? Like where, like you recognize that I'm playing a different game than you when it comes to climate change, right? And so maybe there's something interesting to simulate there and see how like people make different decisions based on their different pieces of information and concerns, and then like, see what happens in that game. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think, what Scott and Faisal are saying is that one of the things we often forget in academic institutions is that there are multiple ways of understanding a certain concept. When we talk about climate change, or we like to put words like climate deniers, and we add more things. But very often there's a difference with what the politics of understanding climate change is the academic approach to understanding climate change, what farmers in different areas of the globe might understand as climate change, and what the people who are advocates of climate protests and so on and so forth, and the people who just deny because they are not aware of the real factors. And then there's all of the agendas around, are we going to save the planet with electrical vehicles? Are we going to save the planet with not allowing vehicles to come into cities and so on and so forth? And nobody pays attention to, have you noticed that on the island of Montreal, there are no snakes? And people are like, yeah, there are no snakes on the island of Montreal. We hate snakes. How can you hate snakes? They are part of the ecosystem. Now you're wondering why there are so many cockroaches and there are so many bugs and so many mice. It's because we ruin ecosystems and we don't know that we do it. The same thing for our food variety and our food systems. There used to be a wonderful Montreal muskmelon that was super popular in the 1800s, which was grown in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, which became a popular fruit worldwide. It was served in the best restaurants of New York. And then more houses started to be built in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. And then the people started saying, we don't want cows close to our houses, and we don't want horses close to our houses. And now we don't want the chickens. And they kept on growing the melon, which became weaker and weaker because the ecosystem, the soil was not being regenerated. And the Montreal muskmelon became very weak, could not be transported, and then it became a non-thing. And then people said, we don't know why, because you have not paid attention to the process, and the locals have not had a say into the policy making and whatever else, how we're populating our cities and so on and so forth. I'll stop here.
All right, thank you for that insight. It's very interesting. But okay, we can transition to the next subject, which is AI, how AI can help with this, maybe. So it has a lot of potential, we know, and upsides and downsides. So we can use it to personalize learning, for example. We can simulate real world scenarios in the games, or like even help things with energy-based energy consumption and waste management and so on. So in my research, I explore how can I use AI to spark environmental conversations in public space. So my idea was AI here is to stay. So why not use it for good? So still there's a real tension, like using these techs harms the environment, but we also want to talk about the environment using these technologies. So what are your thoughts on this? So AI often requires a lot of energy. How do we ensure that AI-driven environmental games or any type of systems or like methods, whatever we are building, are truly sustainable or worth building them in the first place? Yeah, go ahead, Faisal.
I'll just give a quick answer, but it's basically what I'm studying for circular economy, right? Like I'm basically looking at this question of like, we're going to set up these smart bins. They're going to have a tech layer, right? There's going to be these microcomputers, screens, and then they're going to be connected to the internet. There's going to be cloud data training, an algorithm on how to recognize waste items. And that's all going to cost energy and materials and have life cycle impacts from the beginning to the end, right? And so the question basically in my research is this claim that this is helpful true? And to be able to answer that, you'd have to be able to look at the whole life cycle impact of all the AI and all the technology components and the material components and the energy components, and then see the difference in the behavior of the people. And you actually have to do what I was hinting at. What can we do that with games in general, right? Does it change their behavior enough? Does it help them sort the waste and then calculate the impact of that change in behavior? And now does that offset all of those costs? And the answer to that is very likely no. Let's be honest. But I want to make sure, I want to check that. But maybe there's a way that we can design these components to be small enough, to be like minimally impacting enough, to use enough renewable energy sources. And that's sort of a beautiful utopian vision as well of technology embedding society. And so that's my project. I hope that kind of model is replicated more and more, and there's more basic tools that we can use to assess that, right? Like, so a lot of people are making these claims. We should all be able to have those tools to assess, is this a good idea or not? And it shouldn't be too complicated to do, but it is.
Yeah.
There are things I just don't understand. And one of those is generative AI consumes a lot of water. So everybody says that. Okay, I understand. But where does the water go? Like water is renewable. So is it having an impact on climate change? Is that why they're saying it uses a lot of water? And I'm wondering, is that more harm than water bottles? Because we're bottling water. So there's a lot of things that I don't understand how the calculations happen. And the statements are put as broad statements, but I'd love to dig deeper in terms of really understanding what are we talking about. The other thing is that we could say, oh, I don't use generative AI because I want to save the environment, but then I buy a phone, which harms the environment even more. So I guess the thing is that these technologies have been they're more democratized now than ever, since November 2022. We were all shocked by it. I had to change my assignments. And that's actually a criticism of optimizing and building efficiencies. Like we can know, I attend all sorts of conferences and people say, well, what are we going to do to prevent students to use AI in their assignments? And I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to show them how to do it, and we're going to change our evaluation practices. And we're going to change the design of our assignments. So the real question for different groups is, how do we teach them how to not reject technology, but use technology to optimize, to build efficiencies? And you're thinking about, for example, how long might it take for you to compare a lot of equipment to dig a hole so that you can create a wetland? I was speaking with a farmer recently who said, we could call all the companies and ask for all their specifications, but we can also use generative AI because we could just point to the company websites and ask questions. And obviously, with a certain amount of expertise, you're going to know if the answer is credible or not, and you can make it refine its answer or add more information so that you can actually come up with a good choice. So I think the real question is, once people understand what that technology does and what it doesn't do, then we can step away from, for example, just plagiarizing assignments or letting AI create your assignment and then serving it to the professor. And then all of a sudden, when we have a tapestry of comments that delve deeper into all sorts of things, so we start to see that all the words that are basically used by generative AIs then are in assignments. But wouldn't you be surprised that people are not using it? So the real question is, can we actually embed the processes that are fundamentally parts of those systems so that people can start to understand how they can actually start to think with them?
Yeah.
To just add something to what already been said, yeah, as you mentioned, there is no deny that the generative AI is going to be part of the future. So now the matter is like, how are we going to use it effectively? So for example, again, in an example from our project, what we are going to use AI for is we are going to come up with a generative AI chatbot that like we use this tool as a learning to feature. So for example, at some point the user again makes some changes, so we try to kind of lead the user by enhancing learning that why they they choose this way, and like kind of lead them to more sustainable choices. Like this is what we are thinking, like how we can use generative AI rather than manipulating their decisions or like forcing them to go to a certain direction, more like engaging them in a conversation that leads them to think and see, okay, I can do this change in my travel behavior, in this like lifestyle, and this leads to certain positive outcome for the society or so on. Yeah, this is how, I mean, this, I think this can be one example of the effective use of AI. Yeah.
Good. Okay, all right. We can also talk about the social effects of AI, like social implications, like social life of AI, how it's like the ethics and biases and other like creating regulations for AI. Do you have any comments on that, Scott? Like you work on like media and communication, and your game is also about disinformation. How do you tackle with that?
Yeah, can you just, so I can make sure I'm scoping my answer properly, explain a bit more for everyone what you mean by the social effects of AI?
Yes, like for example, like these technologies are being used widely and there are not enough regulations, like how it's going to affect socially, and the algorithms are biased mostly, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, So AI is a new thing, like in the sense of like it is a change in how a lot of industries are working and functioning. If we look at media history, communication history, a lot of technologies have done this. I mean, Anne-Louise and I have talked about like Anne-Louise always talks about the calculator being a big one for mathematics, and we have it with the printing press for like how things are being written down. And these always create massive social, cultural changes when they appear because they alter how industries function and they work. AI is a bit concerning to some people and creates some social tensions because of the nature of like tech in general moves very quick, but policy moves very slow. And so what you're seeing is not fully unregulated, but very rapid fire kind of engagements from tech companies that are allowing them to explore the possibilities of AI with a lot of safeguards and ethical concerns kind of being left to the wayside. If you even just look at the funding that governments worldwide are putting into ethical AI use versus just AI research, it's pennies to the dollar. And so socially, what this creates is you're having this relatively complex structure of how AI works, right? Like the whole black box of the code is very unfamiliar to the average person of the public. If you ask them to explain an AI, they would be like, maybe they would talk about statistical analysis, maybe. And I'm talking about like academic spaces for that, right? And there's a lot of ambiguous knowledge about how AI actually works, but we're seeing it become more and more commonplace in a lot of industries that many of us are in. And so that creates a lot of anxieties. When we don't fully know something as it works as a general user, we are sometimes kind of caught up in like, well, what does this do? What can this do? And then we hear about, AI fears, AI anxieties, which are reasonable and fair to be bringing up and should be brought up. It creates a lot of tension in the public spectrum, but like, what does this mean for my job, right? Like right now, I'm at an information science lab in Seattle, and students here are worried about like what AI will do to the nature of information science industries, where jobs are entirely being removed as companies try to become more efficient by using AI to replace them. Now, over time, we've seen that AI is not capable of replacing the mass amount of jobs that it was initially foretold to. In time, that might be the case, but currently it's still struggling, right? If you ask AI to do things, it's going to hallucinate still. It's going to mess up still. It's going to make you redo the work, sometimes longer than if you just did the work yourself, especially if you're knowledgeable. And so there are social concerns, and we can talk about a variety of them, though honestly, the one I come to the most by working with students is labor. But there's also a thing to keep in mind that technological change always kind of has this tumultuous time where people fear how it's going to be incorporated. And it's on us as educators and researchers to think about both ethical practice with that, but also helping people make sense of how these structures can be incorporated in their lives in a meaningful way.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we went back and forth between the subjects. I structured the talk bit. This is good. Do you have anything to add with the AI and everything?
Yeah, maybe I want to talk about something that we often forget with ethical AI, and it's that we often talk about how AI is biased, AI is hallucinating, the system designers of AI are not thinking about XYZ. But there's a system ethics, and then there's also the user ethic, which we have not worked on a lot. And again, we're in another tension, which lies on what people understand of the concept and how they actually apply it, which is completely understudied. This is one of the games that I've developed, which is called the Ethical Pursuit. The other game that Scott designed for me, which is Feed the Machine, will be presented in the end of the month somewhere else. But Feed the Machine is exactly that tension, which is you're an intern in a media box and you're competing for a job. And one of the competitors is also AI. So you have to make decisions that you either work to complete your stories, and then there are elements of the stories that you have to complete the stories, and that's how you calculate points at the end, or you feed the machine, which accelerates things but also creates adverse effects. So it's a reflection. It basically the whole aspect of this, which I think is really important to say, is that it's how you debrief at the end, which is extremely important in terms of the final conversation. It doesn't matter what happened in the game, who won, who lost, and so on and so forth, but the game debrief is more important than the actual gameplay at that point. So that's something that we need to think about. Like, how do we debrief people after they've played a game? Like, what are the takeaways? What are the reflections? What are the anxieties? What do they worry? What are the potentials? How can we improve things for the future? And so on.
Yeah.
Like that's something with different subjects. So like refer to what Faisal said. We had a project, for example, that you can see the poster here of eco installation. And then for that project specifically, we realized that we are gonna consume lots of energy. However, we are going to teach sustainability. So it's a kind of contrast. And then we made this really simple simulation and said to understand how much energy do we need to install those systems. So how much energy do we need to have for it to function, and then found some components, for example, some specific solar facades, or some we realized that we can use some LED elements on the window of the facade that we can absorb energy and also use. So there are ways. I'm not saying that it's the absolute answer to that, but there are ways that we can find the source of the energy to be receive that energy from the nature and then use it for AI to teach sustainability. So just the important thing is that not forget the whole purpose, because I realize that we are so focused on the technology and the use of technology to teach sustainability, and we forget the impact of the use of that technology. So we should just be aware and consider both sides, and there can be some solutions at least to not to provide all the energy that we want, but at least make it less.
Yeah. All right. Just if you have a quick thing, we need to. Okay, thank you. All right, we're coming to the end for our hour, but I want to ask you one last question about the future. What are you excited about? Like, what innovations do you think AI will bring to the table, and what questions we will be asking in the future? I'll give you a minute to think. Go ahead.
I mean, I'll start. Not a very well thought out answer, but I was before when you're talking about the different kinds of AI integrated into games, right? Like we talk about generative AI a lot, but when I think of games and AI, like because I'm born in the '80s, like I think of the first like iteration we saw of AI was not like ChatGPT or something. It was like your artificial intelligence in your opponent, right? Like, so really crude versions of like very simple rules of how to like beat you at a game, like, right? Like I'd be playing Mortal Kombat and there's an AI technically fighting me. Anyway, so my point though is that AI has existed for a long time. It's just become like way more sophisticated recently, and using different levels of like modeling and algorithms and data, right? And so now we're really concerned about it because the impact is huge. But there still are more types of AI than just generative AI, right? Like there's recommender systems, like that influences our lives in very substantial ways. You go and shop on Amazon and things are being pushed to you, right? And so what I wanted to just say generally is I'm excited about people thinking about AI for sustainability in general, right? Like I just think there's so much potential and just breaking out beyond the constraints of like the ways we're thinking about it now.
I'm glad that you talked about the positive aspect because I'm just about to talk about the negative aspects. And I think that, the fact that a technology exists, I hope that what it would do is that it would enable people to reflect a little bit more about not relying so much on consumerism, not relying so much on external access to goods, external access to things. And with the current political climate, I think now is the time to engage into this discussion. It's like, where does our food come from? Where does our water come from? Where does the electricity come from? And AI systems are regulating logistics in cities in terms of which trucks come in for goods, delivery of water within our systems, delivery of electricity, the bandwidth of the internet, and so on and so forth. And I think that, when I think about some people who cannot go around the city without looking at their phone on their car so that they can follow Google Maps, they look more at their phone than at the actual environment to recognize landmarks and so on. people who don't have food reserves or don't know how to preserve their food, people who wouldn't know where to get water if the water system blocked. So I think that developing a critical literacy on what I need for my existence, as opposed to what systems can actually do for me in terms of how I can access what I need, is going to be a very important thing. So hopefully the innovation that we're going to get is people who start to look at this to say, well, that's great and we can optimize things, but also can we have citizen movements to start protecting ourselves a little bit more than what we've done in the past with all the globalization movement and the fact that we were going to be protected from the outside. We're going to be, our food is going to come from the outside, or the national security is going to come from the outside, and so on. So I think citizen movements would be the greatest innovation in this context.
Yeah, thank you. Any final thoughts?
I can share some minor thoughts as well, just building off what Anne-Louise was saying. Like, I'm optimistically pessimistic about the futures with AI, not because I don't see the value in it, and I think that there's a lot of potential, but to what Anne-Louise is saying, sometimes when we have new technology that makes life more efficient, there are actually people that get lost in that efficiency. You saw that with e-government movements. When you saw governments go more paperless, you had a lot of seniors get left out of how they could participate in government spaces, right? And so I think there's a lot of potential for AI as a tool to be creative, as a tool for learning. There's a lot of space for like people who are independent, who don't have a lot of money to kind of create stuff with AI and create stuff that can be meaningful for their communities. But it also can shed light on when we try to be efficient, what kind of gets lost in that intersect. And we're actually seeing it happen where the initial kind of prowess of AI coming out led to all these people being like, we're going to cut jobs, we're going to be able to save so much money, we're going to be able to hire less people. And then all of a sudden AI wasn't able to actually fulfill those jobs that it was apparently taking over, right? And there was an understanding that this efficiency of kind of grunt labor was actually ineffective because human connection and human community is critical. And so for me, the next steps that AI kind of opens up is space for kind of thinking creatively. There we go. Thinking creatively about how we and our communities can kind of work together around and with technology. There are futures with technology that can be absolutely incredible, and there are futures with technology that can be absolutely dystopian. And I'm not here to tout either narrative per se, but AI offers a chance to think about those possibilities and where we center ourselves and our communities within that discussion. And I think that's a meaningful conversation to be having and keep having.
Yes, thank you so much. So any other thoughts?
Like to just add what Scott already mentioned, like I'm just really curious, like how, like what measures our governments are taking, because like whenever we see this big transition, like with the introduction of internet and like several times in the history, like there will be a lot of repercussions and job losses and so I'm just wondering what kind of policies are governments, or what is the role of governments in supporting those people who lose their jobs? Like, because yeah, like everyone talks about, yeah, like introduction of AI is also equals to creation of new jobs. But as we mentioned, maybe there are some people that they struggle to adjust themselves to get to those positions. So what will be the role of governments? It's just a curious question for everyone.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So before we move on, we will open it up for a quick Q&A. If you have any questions, if you would like to share, whether you're here in person, if you're joining online and have a question, you can pop in the chat. Any questions?
Yeah, anyone joining us on Zoom, just write your question into the chat. We can read it out for you. The question here, just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over you. Isa's going to have to steal one of yours up at the table.
No. Let's see. Okay, we can move on. We have more time in the second round. If you have any questions, you can ask them as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Big thank you for my guests here today. Thank you for being here and sharing your insight with us. And thank you for our guests in here and online for joining us for this conversation. That's been a great discussion for me. I loved it personally. I had fun. I hope you had fun and like got inspired in a way. So we are gonna play the game in the next part. But first, I'd like to say if anyone wants to leave, you can leave right now. So just a reminder. So before the jump into the play session, I want to share a little background of this board game, how we designed it, and we will try to digital game first, and for our online audience, so that they can join and play the game as well. And then we will unfortunately let our online guests go and play the board game here in person. So let's dive in. First of all, let me share my screen for the presentation. Okay. All right. So this game was designed as a part of my research on how we can use playful interactive tools to raise awareness about sustainable development. So it's specifically about the built environment. So my PhD research explores how we can use AI and digital interactivity to spark meaningful environmental dialogues in public spaces. So the core question I'm asking is, how can these technologies help inspire real eco-action through more engaging and accessible conversations? So my idea was design an AI-powered interactive digital game, essentially an interactive public installation. So I started by developing the concept on paper. So and then to test the game mechanics and the core elements, so we decided to first create an analog board game version of it. So that's how the board game came to life. This was the first prototype for the board. So I designed the first iteration in collaboration with Nagar here. And with our supervisor, Dr. Carmela Cucuzzella. So the board game allowed us to test the core mechanics and more easily and in a cheaper way, of course. So we gathered some valuable insights to inform the digital version. So we play tested it with different audiences, students, and as Nagar mentioned earlier, with different stakeholders throughout surveys and like focus groups. So based on that input, so we went on to create the first digital prototype of the game. So we chose to focus on the sustainable development goal number 11 for the game. So which is all about making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So we turned 4 of the targets under this goal into gameplay themes. So to make these complex issues a little more approachable and a lot more fun to explore. So these are the safe and affordable housing, low environmental impact, affordable and sustainable transformation, and safe and inclusive public spaces. So we color-coded them to make them easily understandable. So each of these themes includes a set of problem cards and action cards that provide solutions. Oh, sorry. So let's start with the digital game. I'm gonna send a link in the chat for our online guests. Here you go. It's very basic. So this is the very basic prototype, the first prototype we made. So you will, in this game, you will take on the role of like future-focused problem solver, helping shape a more sustainable Montreal. So you will be faced the real-world challenges as to choose creative, impactful solutions. So it's basically like written text, like text-based SimCity, but it's a very, very, very simple version of it. Like there used to be games, maybe you know, like you were asked to do something like you're in a dungeon there is a dragon, what you do, and you write, I draw my sword and this and that. So the idea starts like that, but so instead of writing, because I was designing this as an installation in a public space, so they're not going to be able to write anything. So I created that, put in the second here. Okay, and here you see there's going to be, when you start, when you push the start button, there's going to be a problem here and 3 options to solve the problem. So the game asks you to choose 2 of the solutions. There are no wrong answers. So here's like a little bit more for understanding people's preferences, like priorities, what they are choosing. So the game plays like this. If you want to like play right now, we can test this. Can you guys play as well? By scanning the code. I can make it bigger. Is it better? So the idea is that when you answer the question, actually I can share my screen and I can play it here. Yeah, let me do that. That will be fun. Okay, let me go to the Zoom. All right, just a second. Okay, I'm there. Share. Okay, all right. So here, let's play. Okay, tap here to start. We see the map of Montreal. So we see some percentages here. This indicates like how sustainable is the city right now, according to these 4 categories. So we start, tap here to start, and the problem comes up. It's about safe neighborhoods. So crime rates, including theft and harassment, have significantly increased in the city, causing residents to feel unsafe, especially during evening hours. So what do we do? We can choose 2 of them. Yeah. So the first one, install more street lights and improve lighting in poorly lit areas across the city. The second one, restrict access to parks and secluded areas after dark to deter criminal activity. And the third one, assign dedicated police patrols to high crime areas during peak hours. So I'm gonna choose the first 2, just so. Just I prefer. Okay, and submit. So the game is going to create an AI generated image. So what we did is like improved lighting and restricted park areas and reduced opportunities for crime, but they reduced the use for the public spaces, like, so the idea is it goes here on the map. So the idea here is to like make the game collectively played. So I came like passed by this installation, I played, and Negarden passed by next day, she played again, and like it collectively collects the data of people playing and changes the percentages here. And the original, when we go back to the original idea, let me put that back on. The installation. Okay, where is it? And the show. Sorry about these technical. Okay, here. Okay, here we go. So there's a projection of a river analogy that when the city of Montreal is sustainable, so this means that a lot of people played and solved these problems, the river goes like flowing, clear, everything is good, green or blue. And when they stop playing, the river starts to like break down, desolated, like darker, warmer colors, like unnatural colors. So it will indicate people to welcome people, like ask people to join, in my idea, at least, to join the Save the River, like make it flow again, so that they play and the percentage just changes and the river gets cleaned. So this is the idea of the digital game, very simple and yeah. So we're gonna continue with the board game right now. Let me stop it here and pass. I will thank you again for joining in, and we're gonna say goodbye to our online friends and guests here. Thank you so much for joining, Scott. Thank you so much again, and have a great one. See you next time.
Thanks, Burcu. Let's clap. That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming in and participating. Scott, it's great to see you virtually. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just to let you know, this remains available on our YouTube channel if you want to revisit it. And those of you here, you should stick around and play this game. Okay. Thanks a lot. See you soon.